So, welcome back to our own devices, and we have the man himself. Nimish is back on the show after a little bit of a break where I was getting one guest after the other. So, with Nimish back on our own devices, I think this week it's an easy decision on what we are going to chat about, and we are going to chat about the biggest tech news of the year or every year, and that is the iPhone launch event, or what Apple calls the Apple event. This year it was called the California streaming event because we are not in California, and I've been used to going there every year. But this year we have done it from here, and it's actually a little bit better because you don't have to run around. Because covering an Apple
Really?
event comes with a lot of running around, a little bit of stress, and trying to get to the devices before the others. So it's fun, but it's also stressful. This time you just watch it on YouTube. Nimish, welcome back on the show.
Thank you, Nandagopal. It's wonderful to be back. Let me do a small question. How have you do you miss the shows? Do you actually find it easier now, just following it on YouTube? There must be pros and cons.
I do miss the show. I do miss the show because, see, being there with literally the who's who of tech journalism in the world, and also a lot of the analysts who we reach out to for their insight, and a lot of the
Right.
companies who are part of the show, right? Like if Apple has a Nintendo partnership which is going to showcase, there are usually a few Nintendo people also in the crowd. So,
True.
so it is a it's a very different mix. There are a lot of stars. Usually, I saw Sia once, and I don't know who she
Hmm.
was. Sorry, I'm a little bit old. I don't know who she was, and I asked somebody who she is. And then I saw Sia, and apparently she has an alter ego, which I thought was the real person, and it was fun.
Oh, good
But
lord.
a lot of people I've met there, and sorry, had the opportunity of seeing, and I have not really met. But it's just being there is a great experience, and hearing from Apple what they have thought of, why is a feature here, how do you use it, that is a big experience in itself, and that I do miss. Though from a pure journalism covering part, it's much more easier to handle if it's a streaming.
Indeed, and so this time we had what? We had two iPads and we had an Apple Watch and we had the normal. What is the now normal array of four iPhones? So what struck you, Nandagopal? Did I miss something? But at
No,
least those were
that's all.
there.
If you leave out the Apple TV and all of that.
Ah, yes, of course. I knew there was something missing.
So
So
the way
what
I
struck
would
you?
like, yeah, the way I would like to sum it up is that this was ideally an S year. In the Apple scheme of things, this should have been the 12S year,
Yes, that
right?
way.
And S year means it's a little bit of a subdued. S does not stand for subdued, but yeah, S. It is usually a tick tock. So when the talk comes, the talk is little bit lesser impactful than the tick is usually how it is. So I think Apple thought that instead of doing it as an S, which it has not been doing recently, is to just
Right.
let's go, be done with the 13 jinx. So there are a lot of upgrades, but very few surprises or features that's really going to blow you away. There are a few that struck me, but if you look at it, all the impactful features or upgrades are on the camera side this year.
Yes, yes, indeed, Nandagopal. And as someone who has used cameras a fair bit, I know you have been using Leica and stuff and everything. What is fascinating this time is like Apple. I remember in the early days, I think it actually started around the 3GS because prior to that, the cameras weren't exactly anything to write about. They were easy to use, but they weren't exactly powerful compared to what we had on the Sony Cybershot, which was Sony Ericsson Cybershot and the Nokia N series. But around the 3GS, it started getting better, and suddenly there was a statistic that was thrown at us that on Flickr, the most popular camera in the world is the
Is
iPhone.
the airport.
And now, after having dominated stills, the feeling I got this time when we had the briefing was this was so much about video, wasn't it? The cinematics and everything, and they had that lovely whodunit intros. Does anyone do intros better than Apple do? Does
Yeah.
how do you see? Do you think videos are the next big thing for them?
I think I haven't thought of it this way, but yeah, Nimish, when you say it, so so you had this era of hashtag iPhoneography, right?
Yes.
And maybe we are now coming to the hashtag, video phonography or whatever they want to call it, where so it's not so much about doing really out of the world stuff, like, because if you go on social media, you will see a lot of
True.
videos coming out of China, for instance, saying, hey, Apple is doing a 2x optical zoom, this and this Huawei camera can show you the moon, literally, you know so it is there. So Apple is not about that, but Apple is about setting the standard, that this is near perfection. Maybe you can go above it or below it, but this is your standard. I think that is what they're setting in video. And really, when I look at that cinematic mode, it's really awesome, right? Because
Oh
one,
my God. Yeah.
you have computer deciding when to shift
Shift
focus,
focus.
right? Two, you can decide if you're on the pro mode, you can do that yourself. You can change focus with just one touch, which is not a big deal. But the fact that you can do it in post process, right?
Right.
You shoot the video and then you decide that the subject in the forefront is not the person who you want to have in focus. You want the subject in the background, and when you're post editing, you just tap on the background subject and it changes. That is really magic, and see the kind of freedom that gives you. I won't be surprised if a lot of cinematographers actually move to an iPhone, because they will make lesser errors. It's very tough to go back and reshoot a scene, but if they want to just change it using, then you just shoot on the iPhone.
Yes, and Nandagopal, what's fascinating is uh, the way in which Apple has handled video editing in software. Because um, unlike other devices, where if you have to edit video, you actually have to open a separate app, or you get very very basic editing in the gallery app of most Android phones and other devices. But Apple, if you notice, in the iPhone, the video editing, you actually just go in in the Photos app or the Videos gallery app, you open it. The editing options are not only very similar to the ones which are there in the photo options, but they're even designed separately. I mean, sometimes on Android, to crop a video, you have to go and get an additional app. Here, you can crop a video, you can flip a video, you can use filters. So they've actually made the whole process so seamless, and of course, the processors are so fast that things actually just happen like that, which is, I mean, it's magnificent.
So talking about editing, there's a very interesting feature. They showed you how you can customize, and it's not great to. So, like, say, point and shoot cameras have for long had the ability to shoot something in vivid or in a warm tone or everything. Apple lets you do that. You shoot, you can post in the post, you can change it to vivid or a high contrast or a warm tone. But what the computational photography does here is that the skin tone of the subject is let alone. So the
Yeah.
skin tone of the subject does not change when you change the customization on the photo, or if you change it into a warm. It's not like a person with, let's say, a very pale skin tone
Pink.
is suddenly
Right.
going to look yellow, because to in tune with the rest of the image. It is not happening. That is the kind of small detail that Apple puts a lot of effort into, and that ultimately takes their product slightly ahead of the race.
Indeed, Gopal's absolutely spot on. And since we are talking of the iPhones and you brought in the race, it's kind of fascinating to see how Apple seems to be operating almost in a zone of its own when it comes to the camera photography,
Yeah.
obviously to phone photography. Whereas if you look at Android, suddenly everyone is talking about. I mean, it's been 2 years since we have got 108 megapixel camera. We've got four lenses. We've got three lenses which do that. We've got 15 lenses which do that. And Apple has been 12 megapixels since God knows when,
Yes.
and they are just working on better optical image stabilization. There are different kinds
Yeah.
of optical stabilization. They're making sure that each of those lenses is almost on par with at par with each other, barring the size of the aperture, which obviously you have to vary if one is a telephoto and one is a wide angle. And this time they brought night mode to all three
Yeah.
sensors. They have enabled slow motion video in macro, which is kind of something which didn't even come to mind. And then suddenly you realize, look, I can actually zoom in and take a picture of an insect walking on a leaf and it'll come out fine.
Yeah.
It's like,
And
has
again,
Android missed a trick there?
no, it's almost like, as you said, the others saying 108 megapixel, five cameras,
Yeah.
six cameras, this, that, and Apple responding, so, right?
So,
it's almost like that. So it just doesn't care, as you said, right? And again, again, let's look at uh, the ability to shoot macro, right? And Android phones have had it for years. It's come down to the 10,000 rupee range in India, right? You can
Dedicated
get.
macro lenses.
So it's all over the place in Android, and Android users will be like, so what? But how does Apple do it? You are shooting your video, or you're shooting your photo, you move your camera near the subject, it automatically switches into a macro mode. The lens changes on its own and it shoots in macro mode. When you pull it back, it comes back to the lens it was on, right? So if you see on Android, you have to go to a macro mode. I know, and
Manually.
this is usually a underpowered processor, sorry, underpowered um,
Sensor.
sensor that is used. It's usually a 2 MP sensor or something, because you're going to shoot close and like you really don't need the megapixel, which is fine. I don't have a problem. But it's a completely different camera. Here, it's a completely different camera, but it is, yeah, it's intertwined into how you use the camera so naturally that you will suddenly see a spike in how people are shooting. So many people shooting macros of
Exactly.
all sorts of things, right? See the chutney in my dosha, that kind of a thing. You will see a lot of that happening now. No, see that is, see that. So you have a feature, and which everybody can do. What Apple does differently is that you have a feature which a lot of people end up using, because
That's
it
true.
is, it is woven into the flow of how you use. Of course, Apple has had a lot of features which nobody uses. And I always have this one example of that is this. Um, you know,
The touch
is
bar.
the Siri, recipes or whatever they call it. No, the
Ah, yes, yes.
so which I don't use, the IFTT
The
kind of thing.
shortcuts. They call them the shortcuts.
The shortcuts, I have never been able to figure them out. I have set a few of them up,
Same
but I
here.
have never used it. Right. So there are, of
Same here.
course, features like that. Even Siri, I think, is not used as much as Apple would want people to use it.
So the other thing that is striking me when you said about flowing and how Apple actually makes features which are usable is Apple's finally seems to have taken the high refresh rate jump in the Pro range, at least in the Pro and
Yeah.
the Pro Max, and 10 hertz to 120 hertz adaptive, of course, depending on the kind of content that is going to be happening out there. Now we have been seeing 120 hertz on other devices for about what 2 years now. I think
2 years now.
OnePlus 7 was the first. OnePlus 7 Pro
Yeah.
was the first
Yeah.
one which brought
Yeah.
it. I think that was 90.
Yeah.
So do you actually think this is gonna they're gonna change something out here? I mean, we haven't seen the phones yet.
Yeah, so see, my take is that so for the
Uh-huh.
user, it's not going to make any difference. As in, from a usability perspective, you're going to see a really smooth thing like that, and you don't have the customization ability which others have. Android, you can maybe choose 60 as your default, or or 120 as your default. I think some of the phones have that. Here, it is completely automated. But what Apple is giving you is the ability for developers to decide that as you flow from one screen to the other, you want to change the refresh rate so that your experience is the best. So if you are selecting which game, or let's say, if it's a game like Asphalt 8 or something, and you're selecting which track to go on, which is basically a static screen, you will get a 10 or a 20 or a 30 uh, hertz refresh rate, and as soon as the game starts, you go into 120, and the developer has the ability to set that up in the backend. Now what that does is that it suddenly gets the developer community involved in a feature which has been there for 2 years, but is something, okay, I will make my entire game on 120 hertz and let the phone figure out what to do. But now
Yeah.
the developer gets control. See, that is how Apple sort of impacts the ecosystem of users as well as developers. Now suddenly you will see a plethora of games claiming that you have multiple refresh rates on the things. So if you play for 3 hours compared to how you were playing earlier, maybe we use lesser battery, or your experience is going to go up. So the small things that really impact the ecosystem in a big way.
And the big question, of course, is Nandagopal, is as usual, like you said, this would have traditionally a few years ago, this would have been an S model. It would have been a 12S.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there hasn't been a radical overhaul in terms of design, and the changes seem to be very nuanced, very subtle. We've got a faster processor, the refresh rate has gone up, but overall, if you look at the phones from the back or even from the front, actually, You're not going to see a change in resolution. You're not going to see a change in how they look. The lens placement has
Yeah,
already
this
changed a
diagonal.
bit, which has, I know. I think Zomato has taken a poke at that also. God bless them. And but who do you think? Do you think people with 12? We haven't used the devices yet, of course. We need to stress again. Do you think what is going to be the motivation for somebody to move from a 12 to a 13? Say someone like you.
From a 12 to a 13, that's just unnecessary, like, lot of money which is lying around. From a 12, yeah, that is the only reason, and that too not my money, the money my dad has given me. I put a sticker on the back of the phone saying dad's gift. So, that is the
Have
only reason
mercy.
for anybody to move from a 12 to a 13. Unless it's a company, the company is giving you a phone every year or something like that, or you are on a US kind of a plan where every year you can easily
Upgrade.
switch over at little cost, right? For an Indian environment, I don't think it makes sense, but I know a lot of people who change their phones every 6 months just for the heck of it, right?
Indeed.
Because, yeah, because you have a lot of,
Indeed.
yeah, so it is. I don't want to get into that. Yeah, but for
No.
people who are, let's say, on the 10 or even on the 11, because the 12 was a pretty big jump, and improvements on the 12, which is the 13, are going to be significant. So today, for
True.
instance, my cousin who's abroad, who asked me, like, I've been on a 10-hour, very happy using it now and whatever, would you recommend? I said go ahead, like, because for a 10-hour user you will see a significant jump in performance, in camera, on everything, even battery life. That jump from there to here is going to be huge. But if you jump from 12 to 13, it's going to be, it's going to be incremental. It's very,
True.
yeah, it's like maybe driving from diesel to a premium fuel kind of a thing. You will not, like, yeah, you're doing something different, but you might not really feel it.
And well, as somebody who has been using the iPhone right from the very out, from the very beginning, Nangopal, from the very first iPhone itself, where do you think? I mean, this sounds a bit. It sounds sacrilegious to even say it about what people call the God phone. What do you think Apple could have included? Do you think they missed out a trick somewhere?
See, in the smartphone space, I think in the past few years, we have reached the point, Nimish, that,
Hmm.
we really need a disruptor, right? It's
True.
something that, so the iPhone was a disruptor. It completely, it was a
Very
bold
much.
thing to do
Hmm.
because nobody knew we could do something like this, right?
True.
And I have had this thing, I've written about it maybe 2 years ago, that we need a disruptor now, right? And no, so in this phone, I don't see clues to
Hmm.
what could be coming. So for me, I would say my last clue of a big disruptor was the AirPods, right?
Hmm.
And if you see in the post AirPod era, since the first AirPod came, see how much of a hands free, because we have always had the concept of the hands free, the earphone which we put, a lot of people bite onto while they're talking. It's
Yes,
very,
true.
very,
Yeah,
very,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
very Indian thing. They don't let it hang. They put it on the side of their mouth and they talk with the other side of the mouth. But
Right.
but that hands-free thing, that you can actually do a lot of things on the phone with the phone being put away, right? So that for me was a clue. Was the is the next big thing in the phone? Just killing the phone, right?
Right.
Can you think beyond the phone? As in, the phone is there, but it does not need to be in your hand. So a earphone or a watch gives you almost everything that you can do without having the phone. And you pick up the phone only when you actually have to see a screen. And when you look at it, a
Indeed.
lot of the things that we do, see, I can do this video call with you, for instance, without looking at the screen,
True.
right? It can be very
True.
naturally done as long as there is a camera somewhere,
Hmm.
right? So I know, so again, so but I don't know what is that feature that they could have added, right? So I can
True.
list 10 features which Android has, which iPhone doesn't, but I know
Hmm.
the app don't think that way, right? So
True.
even this thing about the satellite thing, right?
Yeah.
Having a satellite call feature, see, it is, for me, it's okay, it's great technological advancement, but then I was also thinking it is not something 100 million people have to use. It is something maybe
Exactly.
one,
Exactly.
a small fraction of those people who have, who frequent places where you could be really stranded. Like, let's say people in the northern part of India who are in Himachal, Uttarakhand,
Hmm. Right.
Jammu and Kashmir, or places where you could be caught in the middle of nowhere, right? People who go for treks in the west coast of the US. or
Exactly.
or people in the Scandinavian countries where there are, like, long swaths of nothingness, right? So for them it makes sense, but it's not a mass use thing, right?
Right.
It's only in an emergency, that an emergency you already have SOS that works, right? And it works even
Right.
in India quite well. So,
Indeed.
so I really can't think of what is the next feature they could have added. Maybe they could have done a 5,000 mAh battery on a phone, but then Apple is
Huh.
so
Yeah.
so much committed to its design that I don't think it will, like, really think about something like that.
Right, and you did mention the watch right in the middle, so I guess this is a good time for us to move to that because the Apple Watch came along the same time as that other disruptor you had mentioned, the AirPods. It came around the same
Yeah.
time, I think, give a this way or that way, and we had the Apple Watch Series 7 this time, and rather amazingly, a lot of folks are saying that this was perhaps the most low profile Apple Watch launch ever because this is the same processor. There were no major changes apart from the design, the display getting a bit bigger. But the accent seemed to be a bit more on software. Do you think this is a radical makeover? And of course, the big question is if you have a Series 6, should you go for a Series 7? Because pretty much everything inside seems to be the same, doesn't it?
I'll put it slightly differently. The Series
Tell
7 is a
me.
watch for which the time has not yet come. So,
Ooh.
right? So it's not
Yes.
there yet. It's not
Hmm.
there yet. And see, Apple has not given you a launch date.
True.
So it's in the works. So maybe 2 3 months down the line they will do a small event, or it's just a press release to say that,
Hmm.
hey, we have these 10 new features in the watch also. Right? For now, it is
Wow.
just the
Yeah.
crystal, the side, the slightly curved display where the curve is also being used to display, and the fact that it's maybe more rough and tough than before, right? And
True.
see, the
Dust
screen
resistant.
traction on an Apple Watch is a problem a lot of people have, right? Like, and if you just walk through Khan Market on any given day, there is one guy who is going to pitch a screen guard to every person he sees with an
Oh,
Apple
Apple
Watch.
Watch. Yes, yes,
so,
yes.
so
True,
that
true.
it's a true use case that you need something which is much stronger on the screen. So that is what they have fixed. Everything else is like, it was, I don't want to pull punches. It was underwhelming the way they showed it, but
True.
I think it's because they are not ready with it. And see,
Ah,
we have to understand we are still in the middle of a very, very bad pandemic, which is impacting a
true.
lot of the supply
Right.
chain and everything. So could be because of that they they're just not there yet.
And of course, which brings us to perhaps the rabbit that Apple pulled out of the hat, and they pulled it out at the very beginning. And I think it was you who referred to it on Twitter when you said, "Was this an iPhone launch or was it an iPad launch?" Because no one really expected the iPads,
Yeah.
and we saw two iPads, and perhaps they were the most, shall we say, improved or the most revamped products we have seen. So let's put you on the stand. iPad Mini. What's your take?
No, I think that was the biggest, the headline point of the thing. But the fact is that
True.
iPad is not as big a mass product as the
As the
iPhone is.
iPhone.
And obviously,
True.
the iPhone usually gets the headlines. But as an
Right.
iPad user for a long time, and Nimish knows how much I am committed to my iPads. But
He was finding stories on them.
so I think those are very big updates, and those are updates that consider the situation we are in, and how a device like this or devices like this sort of become ideal for a pandemic or a work from home or a study from home kind of a situation. And suddenly you see something that we would have looked at as a premium feature when it came in the iPad Pro earlier, the center stage, suddenly
True.
coming down to your most affordable iPad, because
True.
Apple thinks that that is going to make a impact in people's life, and it does, right? Like, and we have
Of
seen so
course.
many times when when we are on office calls and there are multiple people on one side and suddenly one person walks into the screen, the camera suddenly takes the other person also in the screen. He does not have to
Wow.
bend down to show himself. So
Right.
so in a classroom kind of an environment, or where a lot of kids are maybe being taught by a couple of teachers, I think it's going to have huge impact, and it's a very affordable device in the Apple scheme of things, right? There is no iPhone that is as cheap as the iPad, right?
True. And
The only
and
thing
it's
you can't,
rather
the only thing you can't do with it is actually make a voice call. But who then makes a voice call on an iPhone?
on
so,
iPhone.
so you really, should look at the iPad as the device that that can actually plug a lot of gaps that we have in the system right now. But the bigger product, I think, is the iPad Mini, though it's a smaller iPad, you know, and
Yeah.
that is really, it's a killer device because it now comes with the stylus or the Apple Pencil uh, uh, as an add-on. So that I think is really changing it, giving it a lot of might as a product. No, you really don't have a note-taking device that is in that space which you can hold in your hand. The only
Mm.
other device is the Fold 3, right? And the
The iPad Mini also had Apple Pencil support. The iPad Mini had Apple Pencil support, but it was the first generation. This
it
one
was the
has the
first
magnetic one, the second
generation.
generation. It's
Okay, okay,
much
yeah,
better.
yeah, that's true, that's true, that's true.
Second
Yeah, but you
generation.
have scribbling, you have 5G, so it's
True.
a very powerful device as a
A
note-taking
USB
device.
Type C port.
Yeah, and you don't have a lot of options in that space.
Absolutely, and which actually brings me to a side note regarding the pricing. When you're talking about the base iPad, Nankopal, it's wonderful because we saw the first iPad in India about 10 years ago. I think 2011 January, and
2011,
that was
exactly.
20 and 27,990 was the base model. Agreed,
Yeah,
16
yeah,
GB.
yeah,
And on this day and age, this is the first base iPad model which has gone above 30,000. Now, when you think that 10 years have elapsed in
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
I mean, 30,990 for a 64 GB iPad. I mean, how has Apple managed this kind of pricing? Because it's known for being, you say an Apple product and people start saying, we'll sell kidneys and we'll sell this and we'll sell that. Now, this is the base tablet. It is by no means, the iPad is for some reason never been considered to be extravagantly expensive because you
yeah.
are getting a very high resolution display, excellent speakers, fantastic battery life. And yet, the change in price over 10 years has been 3,000, even while the processors improve. The support, the stylus, the Apple Pencil has come in. And of course, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, so holding the price is something Apple has done this time quite well, right? Because iPhones also,
Wonderfully.
the price has been held, though these are very high prices when you compare to the US, right?
Obviously.
Yeah, so to give you an example, today we did a little bit of a conversion of what the Indian price is in dollars. So it's $650 more than the US price of the iPhone Pro Max in India, right?
Good heavens. So,
$650 more. So it's a huge jump because, and there are reasons for it. It is because you are handling a currency that is not really stable. So Apple puts in um,
buffer.
a bandwidth for this, buffer for this change,
Right.
right? And also the fact that India has a lot of taxes that go into something that is being imported completely. So all of that together, but still a very high price to pay. $650. It's almost the price of your entry level iPhone
iPhone.
13.
Yeah, that's right.
So
That's right.
that much of a difference you're paying for getting the top end iPhone. So that is, so it is still a high price, but they're holding the price, especially on the iPhone 13 and the 13 mini, when the storage has been doubled. So when you
True.
usually go from 64 GB to 128 GB on iPhone, you usually pay 10,000 rupees more, right? That is
Totally.
the rough calculation with every iPhone that we have seen. And here we are seeing that you're getting 128 GB as the base model at the same price as the last 64 GB.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
but I think the biggest impact of every new iPhone is how the sales of the old iPhones pick up.
oh,
And
yes, the prices
I
get
know
cut.
that in a country like India, it's going to help them a lot in selling the iPhone 12s and the iPhone 11s.
You spoke of the iPad Mini, which actually brings me to another interesting part of the launch. Apple suddenly seems to have the mini form factor. Apple has not given up on the mini form factor. The iPhone Mini, the 12 Mini last year, wasn't exactly a staggering success. It did okay, but it wasn't a staggering success. The original iPad Mini, means the previous iPad Mini, which came in 2019, was again also not seen as a very big success. It did okay, and yet here it is. Apple has upgraded both of them, and they're still in the market. Do you think that there is space for? Is there an audience still for a smaller phone? And what has Apple changed this time around?
No, of course there is an audience for the smaller phone, and if you look at it, there is no competition for the smaller phone.
No, absolutely zero.
Yeah, so I think that will be a space where Apple would like to be in to hold that ground, right? And don't be surprised if for instance next year there is no mini, and they bring a mini after
Oh,
2 years. They do that, like they've done that. If you look at the iPad Mini, for instance, the iPad Mini
Right.
is not refreshed every year. So they might just hold it for a couple of years if they think, okay, it's good enough for a couple of years. But then you still have something that caters to people with smaller hands. I think the biggest use case is people with smaller hands. There are a lot of people like that, who really can't handle a big phone or don't need a big phone.
True. And they seem to have improved battery life. We were told the battery life is 1.5 hours more on
One and a
the
half hours.
12 mini,
Yeah,
on the 13 mini as compared to 12 mini.
yeah,
The one thing that I think, I mean, it's just a thought that came to my mind was perhaps they could have considered keeping the display 720p instead of full HD, because what happens is then so much gets compressed into the tiny screen that you start
yeah,
frowning. A lot of people, you can of course tweak it in the settings, but then who tweaks anything in the iPhone when it comes to settings? It's right
yeah.
out of the box and you start using it.
And that's how it's supposed to be, right? That is how.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
So,
works.
yeah. So Nimish, look at it the other way. They're giving you, 90 minutes more battery life despite moving to better screen,
Bet screen. That's
right?
true.
So you're basically getting more than 90 minutes, because if it had been 720p, maybe it would have given you 3 hours more,
3 hours more. True.
right?
That's
So,
right.
so,
That's
so
right.
that's one way to look at it. Also, I think, for a product that costs 60,000 rupees in a market like India, 720p is a hard sell, right? Because
Mm,
that could be, with a lot of people, they'll be like, if I'm spending so much money, why shouldn't I get a full HD screen, right?
true.
Because full HD screens are out there for 15,000 rupees when you go to Android. So that thing, that I think could be, a little bit of a, so it's like these people who buy Ferraris with so much money. Now you get only two seats.
Yeah.
It's a two-seater car for the, so you don't really get that sense, and you have an
True.
Innova going, next to it, which costs
Oh
15% of
God.
your car, and it can take 8 people. Huh? But look,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So I
The
think there is,
feels. Yeah.
especially in a country like India, that does matter.
True.
So I think, on this note, we have had a really long, extended version. And Nimish, I was supposed to question you. You ended up questioning me.
Works.
It works. But we have had a, so I think we should call it the iPhone Mini Extra Large episode.
Indeed. Yes. But then they
Yeah,
launched so many products.
yeah, iPad Mini Extra Large episode. So yeah, but on that note, I think Nimish, wonderful having you back on the show.
Wonderful being back,
And
Nandagopal.
I think Nimish will be, coming back to the show more often now.
Would love it.
So, everyone, that was our own devices. We had a special episode on the Apple event, and we will come back with a few more guests, and Nimish, of course, in the coming weeks. We are everywhere you listen to your podcast. This is Nandagopal Rajan saying bye.